Holkham Hall /HKM/or/HLKM/ is an 18th century country house located adjacent to the village of Holkham, Norfolk, England. The house was constructed in the Palladian style for Thomas Coke, 1st Earl of Leicester, 5th creation by the architect William Kent, aided by the architect and aristocrat Lord Burlington. Holkham Hall is one of England's finest examples of the Palladian Revival style of architecture, and the severity of its design is closer to Palladio's ideals than many of the other numerous Palladian-style houses of the period. The Holkham estate had been built up by Sir Edward Coke, the founder of his family fortune. He bought Neal's Manor in 1609, though never lived there, and many other purchases of land in Norfolk to endow to his 6 sons. His 4th son, John, inherited the land and married heiress Mariel Wheatley in 1612. They made Hill Hall their home, and by 1659 John had complete ownership of all 3 Holkham manors. It is the ancestral home of the Coke family, the Earls of Leicester of Holkham. The interior of the hall is opulently, but by the standards of the day, simply decorated and furnished. Ornament is used with such restraint that it was possible to decorate both private and state rooms in the same style, without oppressing the former. The principal entrance is through the marble hall, which is in fact made of pink Derbyshire alabaster. This leads to the piano nobile, or the first floor, and state rooms. The most impressive of these rooms is the saloon, which has walls lined with red velvet. Each of the major state rooms is symmetrical in its layout and design. In some rooms, false doors are necessary to fully achieve this balanced effect. Architects and patron. Holkham was built by 1st Earl of Leicester, Thomas Coke, who was born in 1697. A cultivated and wealthy man, Coke made the grand tour in his youth and was away from England for 6 years between 1712 and 1718. It is likely he met both Burlington, the aristocratic architect at the forefront of the Palladian Revival movement in England, and William Kent in Italy in 1715, and that in the home of Palladianism the idea of the mansion at Holkham was conceived. Coke returned to England, not only with a newly acquired library, but also an art and sculpture collection with which to furnish his planned new mansion. However, after his return, he lived a feckless life, preoccupying himself with drinking, gambling and hunting, and being a leading supporter of cockfighting. He made a disastrous investment in the South Sea Company, and when the South Sea bubble burst in 1720, the resultant losses delayed the building of Coke's planned new country estate for over 10 years. Coke, who had been made Earl of Leicester in 1744, died in 1759, 5 years before the completion of Holkham, having never fully recovered his financial losses. Thomas's wife, Lady Margaret Tufton, Countess of Leicester 1700 to 1775, would oversee the finishing and furnishing of the house. Although Colin Campbell was employed by Thomas Coke in the early 1720s, the oldest existing working and construction plans for Holkham were drawn by Matthew Brettingham, under the supervision of Thomas Coke, in 1726. These followed the guidelines and ideals for the house as defined by Kent and Burlington. The Palladian Revival style chosen was at this time making its return in England. The style made a brief appearance in England before the Civil War, when it was introduced by Inigo Jones. However, following the Restoration it was replaced in popular favor by the Baroque style. The Palladian Revival, popular in the 18th century, was loosely based on the appearance of the works of the 16th century Italian architect Andrea Palladio. However, it did not adhere to Palladio's strict rules of proportion. The style eventually evolved into what is generally referred to as Georgian, still popular in England today. It was the chosen style for numerous houses in both town and country, although Holkham is exceptional for both its severity of design and for being closer than most in its adherence to Palladio's ideals. Although Thomas Coke oversaw the project, he delegated the on-site architectural duties to the local Norfolk architect Matthew Brettingham, who was employed as the on-site clerk of works. Brettingham was already the estate architect, and was in receipt of £50 a year, about £7,000 per year in 2018 terms, in return for taking care of his lordship's buildings. He was also influential in the design of the mansion, although he attributed the design of the marble hall to Coke himself. William Kent was mainly responsible for the interiors of the southwest pavilion, or family wing block, particularly the long library. Kent produced a variety of alternative exteriors, suggesting a far richer decoration than Coke wanted. Brettingham described the building of Holkham as the great work of my life, and when he published the plans and elevations of the late Earl of Leicester's house at Holkham, he immodestly described himself as sole architect, making no mention of Kent's involvement. However, in a later edition of the book, Brettingham's son admitted that the general idea was first struck out by the Earls of Leicester and Burlington, assisted by Minster. William Kent. In 1734, the first foundations were laid, however, Building was to continue for 30 years, until the completion of the Great House in 1764. Design. The Palladian style was admired by Whigs such as Thomas Coke, who sought to identify themselves with the Romans of antiquity. Kent was responsible for the external appearance of Holkham. He based his design on Palladio's unbuilt Villa Mocenigo, as it appears in I Quattro Libri dell'Architettura, but with modifications. The plans for Holkham were of a large central block of 2 floors only, containing on the piano nobile level a series of symmetrically balanced staterooms situated around 2 courtyards. No hint of these courtyards is given externally. They are intended for lighting rather than recreation or architectural value. This great central block is flanked by 4 smaller, rectangular blocks, or wings, and at each corners is linked to the main house not by long colonnades as would have been the Norman Palladian architecture but by short 2-story wings of only 1 bay. Exterior. The external appearance of Holkham can best be described as a huge Roman palace. However, as with most architectural designs, it is never quite that simple. Holkham is a Palladian house, and yet even by Palladian standards the external appearance is austere and devoid of ornamentation. This can almost certainly be traced to Coke himself. The on-site, supervising architect, Matthew Brettingham, related that Coke required and demanded commodiousness, which can be interpreted as comfort. Hence rooms that were adequately lit by 1 window, had only one, as a second might have improved the external appearance but could have made a room cold or drafty. As a result, the few windows on the piano nobile, although symmetrically placed and balanced, appear lost in a sea of brickwork, albeit these yellow bricks were cast as exact replicas of ancient Roman bricks expressly for Holkham. Above the windows of the piano nobile, where on a true Palladian structure the windows of a mezzanine would be, there is nothing. The reason for this is the double height of the staterooms on the piano nobile. However, not even a blind window, such as those often seen in Palladio's own work, is permitted to alleviate the severity of the facade. On the ground floor, the rusticated walls are pierced by small windows more reminiscent of a prison than a grand house. One architectural commentator, Nigel Nicholson, has described the house as appearing as functional as a Prussian riding school. The principal, or south facade, is 344 feet 104.9 meters in length from each of the flanking wings to the other, its austerity relieved on the piano nobile level only by a great 6-column portico. Each end of the central block is terminated by a slight projection, containing a Venetian window surmounted by a single-story square tower and capped roof, similar to those employed by Inigo Jones at Wilton House nearly a century earlier. A near-identical portico was designed by Inigo Jones and Isaac de Cause for the Palladian front at Wilton, but this was never executed. The flanking wings contain service and secondary rooms: the family wing to the southwest, the guest wing to the northwest, the chapel wing to the southeast, and the kitchen wing to the northeast. Each wing's external appearance is identical: 3 bays, each separated from the other by a narrow recess in the elevation. Each bay is surmounted by an unadorned pediment. The composition of stone, recesses, varying pediments and chimneys of the 4 blocks is almost reminiscent of the English Baroque style in favour 10 years earlier, employed at Seton Delaval Hall by Sir John Vanbrugh. One of these wings, as at the later Kettleston Hall, was a self-contained country house to accommodate the family when the staterooms and central block were not in use. The 1-story porch at the main north entrance was designed in the 1850s by Samuel Sanders Tulin, although stylistically it is indistinguishable from the 18th-century building. Interior. Inside the house, the Palladian form reaches a height and grandeur seldom seen in any other house in England. It has, in fact, been described as the finest Palladian interior in England. The grandeur of the interior is obtained with an absence of excessive ornament, and reflects Kent's career-long taste for the eloquence of a plain surface. Work on the interiors ran from 1739 to 1773. The first habitable rooms were in the family wing and were in use from 1740. The Long Library being the first major interior completed in 1741. Among the last to be completed and entirely under Lady Leicester's supervision is the chapel with its alabaster reredos. The house is entered through the marble hall, though the chief building fabric is in fact pink Derbyshire alabaster, modelled by Kent on a Roman basilica. The room is over 50 feet 15 meters from floor to ceiling and is dominated by the broad white marble flight of steps leading to the surrounding gallery, or Paris-style. Here alabaster Ionic columns support the coffered, gilded ceiling, copied from a design by Inigo Jones, inspired by the Pantheon in Rome. The fluted columns are thought to be replicas of those in the Temple of Fortuna Virilis, also in Rome. Around the hall are statues and niches. These are predominantly plaster copies of classical deities. The hall's flight of steps lead to the piano nobile and state rooms. The grandest, the saloon, is situated immediately behind the great portico. with its walls lined with patterned red kaffoy, a mixture of wool, linen and silk, and a coffered, gilded ceiling. In this room hangs Rubens's Return from Egypt. On his grand tour, the Earl acquired a collection of Roman copies of Greek and Roman sculpture which is contained in the extensive statue gallery, which runs the full length of the house north to south. The north dining room, a cube room of 27 feet 8.2 meters, contains an Axminster carpet that perfectly mirrors the pattern of the ceiling above. A bust of Aelius Verus, set in a niche in the wall of this room, was found during the restoration at Nettuno. A classical apse gives the room an almost temple air. The apse, in fact, contains concealed access to the labyrinth of corridors and narrow stairs that lead to the distant kitchens and service areas of the house. Each corner of the east side of the principal block contains a square salon lit by a huge Venetian window, one of themed landscape room hung with paintings by Claude Lorrain and Gaspard Poussin. All of the major staterooms have symmetrical walls, even where this involves matching real with false doors. The major rooms also have elaborate white and multicolored marble fireplaces, most with carvings and sculpture, mainly the work of Thomas Carter, though Joseph Pickford carved the fireplace in the statue gallery. Much of the furniture in the staterooms was also designed by William Kent, in a stately classicizing Baroque manner. So restrained is the interior decoration of the staterooms, or in the words of James Lees Milne, chaste, that the smaller, more intimate rooms in the family's private southwest wing were decorated in similar vein, without being overpowering. The long library running the full length of the wing still contains the collection of books acquired by Thomas Coke on his grand tour through Italy, where he saw for the first time the Palladian villas which were to inspire Holkham. The Green State bedroom is the principal bedroom. It is decorated with paintings and tapestries, including works by Paul Saunders and George Smith Bradshaw. It is said that when Queen Mary visited, Gavin Hamilton's lewd depiction of Jupiter caressing Juno was considered unsuitable for that lady's eyes and was banished to the attics. Grounds. Work to the designs of William Kent on the park commenced in 1729, several years before the house was constructed. This event was commemorated by the construction in 1730 of the obelisk, 80 feet 24 meters in height, standing on the highest point in the park. It is located over half a mile to the south and on axis with the center of the house. An avenue of trees stretches over a mile south of the obelisk. Thousands of trees were planted on what had been windswept land. By 1770 the park covered 1,500 acres, 6.1 square kilometers. Other garden buildings designed by Kent are, near the far end of the avenue, the Triumphal Arch, designed in 1739 but only completed in 1752, and the domed Doric Temple 1730-35 in the woods near the obelisk. Above the main entrance to the house within the marble hall is this inscription: "This seat, on an open barren estate, was planted, built, decorated and inhabited the middle of the 18th century by Thos Coke, Earl of Leicester." Under Coke of Norfolk, the great-nephew and heir of the builder, extensive improvements were made to the park, and by his death in 1842 it had grown to its present extent of over 3,000 acres, 12 square kilometers. As well as planting over 1 million trees on the estate, Coke employed the architect Samuel Wyatt to design over a number of buildings, including a series of farm buildings and farmhouses in a simplified neoclassical style and, in the 1780s, the new walled kitchen gardens covering 6 acres 24,000 square meters. The gardens stand to the west of the lake and include a fig house, a peach house, a vinery, and other greenhouses. Wyatt's designs culminated in circa 1790 with the Great Barn, located in the park half a mile southeast of the obelisk. The cost of each farm was in the region of £1,500 to £2,600. Lodge Farm, Castleacre, cost £2,604 6s. 5d. In 1797 to 1800. The lake to the west of the house, originally a marshy inlet or creek off the North Sea, was created in 1801-03 by the landscape gardener William Eames. After his death, Coke was commemorated by the Coke Monument, designed by William Dunthorne and erected in 1845-8 at a cost to the tenants of the estate of £4,000. The monument consists of a Corinthian column 120 feet 37 meters high, surmounted by a drum supporting a wheat sheaf and a plinth decorated with bas-reliefs carved by John Henning Jr. The corners of the plinth support sculptures of an ox, sheep, plow and seed drill. Coke's work to increase farm yields had resulted in the rental income of the estate rising between 1776 and 1816 from £2,200 to £20,000, and had considerable influence on agricultural methods in Britain. In 1850, Thomas Coke, 2nd Earl of Leicester, called in the architect William Byrne to build new stables to the east of the house, in collaboration with W. A. Nesfield, who had designed the parterres. Work started at the same time on the terraces surrounding the house. This work continued until 1857 and included, to the south and on axis with the house, the monumental Fountain of St. George and the Dragon dated circa 1849-57 sculpted by Charles Raymond Smith. To the east of the house and overlooking the terrace, Byrne designed a large stone orangery, with a 3-bay pedimented center and 3-bay flanking wings. The orangery is now roofless and windowless. Holkham today. The cost of the construction of Holkham is thought to have been in the region of £90,000. This vast cost nearly ruined the heirs of the first Earl, but had the result that they were financially unable to alter the house to suit the whims of taste. Thus, the house has remained almost untouched since its completion in 1764. Today, this perfect, if severe, example of Palladianism is at the heart of a thriving private estate of some 25,000 acres 100 square kilometers. Though open to the public on Sundays, Mondays, and Thursdays, it is still the family home of the Earls of Leicester of Holkham.